Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yalda Hakim, and I'll be your moderator for the next hour or so. Now, when Raisina began 5 years ago, ISIS controlled 11 million people and an area the size of Tamil Nadu with $1 billion economy. Since then, the situation has dramatically reversed to the extent that the Americans in their national defense strategy say, for the first time since 9/11, terrorism is no longer their primary threat. So has this threat truly receded, or are we burying our head in the sand? We'll specifically be speaking about the future of terrorism in this region. I'd like to welcome my panelists, General Bipin Rawat, who's the Chief of Army Staff of the Indian Army, Saad Mohseni, who's the CEO of the Moby Group, Gareth Bailey, who's the UK's Special Representative on Afghanistan and Pakistan, and Aaron Saltman, who's the Head of Counter-Terrorism at Facebook. General, I've just returned from Syria, and there's no doubt that ISIS is regenerating. How do you see the threat of terrorism evolving?
Well, before we talk of the topic of the day, I would like to begin by talking on the nature and the character of warfare. Well, wars will always be violent, and there will continue to be more violence, whether it is warfare in the conventional sense or terrorism, because of the advent of technology, easy availability of weapons with the terrorists. And then we come down to the characteristics of warfare and the changing character of warfare. Well, I would like to compare this to the bill of fare on the banquet table today. As I said, I'll be talking about the banquet. Well, you have the soup getting served, which is comparable to the cyber warfare that is going to be launched before any combat. You'll have disruptions of military systems, civilian systems like the railways, power grids, and what have you. And just when the soup is over, you'll see that the starters have arrived, which will come in the form of missiles and drone attacks. And if that is enough, and this is something which will land in the hand of terrorists as well. So you will witness all this happening in terrorism. The future of terrorism is going to be as dirty as combat, conventional combat. So if the adversaries are quite satisfied with soup and starters, then they can go straight to the desert, which is the negotiating table, and start negotiating. And you feel that there's a happy ending to it. But that is not the way things will happen. You will have to go in for the main course. And main course is going to be mainly non-vegetarian. A lot of bloodshed on the battlefield, attrition, man-on-man combat, combat in the air, combat in the seas. And finally, when all that gets over, depending on who's the vanquished, you will finally get the desert served. And with the political masters then looking at the end state. So we might think that there is a happy ending to all that, and that everything will come to an end. But let us not forget that this banquet could well be attacked by a swarm of bees in the form of terrorists. So this war is not ending. The war on terror is something which is going to continue. We'll have to live with it until we understand and get to the roots of terrorism. So to say that, the desert has been served and everything has come to an end, but don't forget, even at the end of that, there's a lot of cleaning to be done. The tables have to be cleaned, the dishes have to be washed, and a lot of things to be accounted for the damages. So therefore, what is the future of terrorism? The future of terrorism is that terrorism is here to stay. So long as there are going to be states that are going to be sponsoring terrorism, so long there are going to be states that are going to use terrorists as their proxies, make weapons available to them, make the funding for them, we cannot control terrorism. And therefore, what is the final end state that we wish to arrive at? We have to bring an end to terrorism, and that can only happen the way the Americans started after 9/11. They said, let's go on a spree on global war on terror and let the nations join together and fight terrorism together. Well, to do that, what do you have to do? You have to isolate the terrorists. Anybody who's sponsoring terrorism has to be taken to task. You cannot have partners who are partnering with you in the global war on terror and yet sponsoring proxies and terror.
You're referring to Pakistan?
I'm referring to any country which is sponsoring terror. Yes.
How do you deal with a problem like Pakistan?
Yeah, therefore the problem with this is you have to have an international messaging that has to go to them, hard action being taken. And I feel One of the measures that has been adopted is blacklisting by the FATF, is one good measure. Diplomatic isolation, you have to do this. You have to bring about acceptability in the nation that yes, they are sponsors of terrorism. Denial of terrorism, to say that they are not denying it, they are themselves victim of terrorism, cannot continue for on, and I think we have to get the bull by these horns and take them to task.
So then I take it you're a supporter of the peace deal with the Taliban?
Yes, I do agree that you have to come to a peace deal with everybody. So if you have to come to a peace deal with them, you have to go for a negotiated peace. But in that, the Taliban or whichever organization is contemplating terror has to give up that weapon of terror. They have to come to the main table, they must come into the political mainstream, and then if they want to rule the country through the will of the people.
Well, they did once before, and we saw how that ended.
Well, but they did, but yet they had the power of the gun behind them. When you have...
Do you think they'll have the power of the gun this time?
As of now, it is difficult to say, but I would say yes, they will.
So you think that Pakistan will continue to support, fund, back the Taliban if they were to return?
The answer is yes.
And what are the implications for the region?
Implications is that for some time you may be seeing a semblance of peace in Afghanistan, but finally it may be things back to normal. You have to basically change the ideology of the people who are residing in this area, the ideology behind Taliban, and only then can you bring in lasting peace in the region.
Does it make you angry that the Americans are negotiating with the Taliban?
No, not really angry. You finally have to come into the negotiation. But I think when you come into the negotiation, it must ensure lasting peace. It should not be just a temporary measure to find an exit. Today, the Afghan National Defense Force is emerging. They need support. They need technological support, they need air support, but let me tell you, they are doing a good job. We need to give them the credit, but that support must continue for some more time.
Gareth, the United Kingdom is often accused of being in Pakistan's corner when it comes to Kashmir, when it comes to various other issues. How do you respond to that?
Thank you, Yalda. Before I go into that topic, which I obviously imagined you would raise, I think it behooves us all here to pay tribute and remember the victims of terrorism. And while I'm here in Delhi, I want to remember that by the last count in 2018, some 340 Indians lost their lives to terrorists, and that is unconscionable. And the UK knows the suffering that a nation can bear when it loses its people to terrorist action. So I just want to record that and to record our sympathy and empathy with India today. To your point on Pakistan, and indeed I think I know where the General is going, it is absolutely clear that terrorist groups are operating from within Pakistan. They pose a serious challenge to the government of Pakistan and to South Asia's regional stability. Absolutely clear. So what do you do about that? What you do about that, if you're the UK, is you engage, and you engage hard. You engage at every level, from the bottom to the very top. You engage regularly, and you set out in terms the importance of action against proxy groups and against terrorism and against extremism. And I know very clearly that the charge is put that somehow the UK is close to Pakistan or too close to Pakistan. But it's just a simple matter of necessity. We have to be engaged with countries across South Asia, having robust conversations at all levels about what needs to happen and needs to happen urgently.
But does the General have a point when he says that for 18 years you've been supporting, backing, funding, they've been allies, and yet they haven't been offering the support that they should be in dealing with and cracking down on groups like the Quetta Shura?
It is clear that these sorts of enterprises are intergenerational in their duration. If I take Northern Ireland, we, the British government, I should say, began talks with the IRA 26 years before the Good Friday Agreement in 1972. The year of my birth. Disavowed, secret back channel, and that wasn't pleasant. That wasn't an easy thing to do, particularly at the time. That was an uncomfortable place in which to be, and it signaled just how hard the yards are, how long the path is for one to have to tackle terrorism. 18 years into the UK's latest commitments to Afghanistan, it feels extremely hard. But at the same time, to the point that's previously been made, I feel that what the United States are doing is innovative, courageous, enterprising, and really trying to push for that settlement, that long-term settlement that you've both implied needs to happen.
There are those who argue that just the way the United States took decisive action against, say, Qasem Soleimani, they should be doing the same thing in the sanctuaries in Pakistan.
I think, first thing, you point out that the issue of terrorism and proxy terrorism is a global phenomenon. You have different manifestations worldwide. And as you have different manifestations, so you require different responses. Responses have to be tailored to the situation at hand. Now, on Iran, the UK government has put it on record that we do not lament the passing of Qasem Soleimani. At the same time, we've made equally clear that the way forward is restraint, and that the way forward is to achieve a return to, in the Middle East region, enduring political settlement on the basis of compliance with international law and the rules-based system.
Can I just pick up on that with you, General? Do you think that there should be more decisive action when it comes to these sanctuaries in Pakistan?
Well, yes, that's what I alluded to. I said, yes, there needs to be decisive action. With Pakistan, we are looking at blacklisting by the FATF. That is one measure. And if finally that doesn't yield results, then you've got to go in for decisive action. Yes, I do agree with you.
Saad, we've just spoken to the General about the regional implications here of a peace deal. Domestically, though, how does that impact things in Afghanistan as far as terrorism is concerned, if there is a peace deal that's been struck?
Well, I think that the Taliban narrative that they have won is obviously is one that dominates now in Afghanistan, that they have forced the Americans to do this deal. And the unfortunate thing is that 20 years after 9/11, that it is the Americans sort of giving up and walking away from Afghanistan. Not just Afghanistan, we're seeing it in Syria, and we may see it in Iraq. So the world, I think, has, this global front to fight terror. It seems to be on retreating to an extent. And one of the concerns that I have is that people always talk about the Taliban or ISIS or different organizations and how we've defeated them. Radical violent Islam as an idea is still well and alive and stronger than ever before. So I think that collectively we're not doing things right. But to the General's point, I mean, I think it's going to be impossible to defeat these ideas and these organizations if they have sanctuaries, if they have outside state support from not just Pakistan, but other countries as well in the region. And I think that that's why we have to have a very grown-up approach to this. I just read the Afghanistan chapter of a senior US official's book, which is coming out later this year. I mean, his point was that we have fought 18 wars in Afghanistan 1 year at a time. That I think that, it's much more tactical than strategic. We don't actually take a step back and think through the consequences of our actions. The concern that we have is groups like the Taliban. I mean, even if we do a deal with the Taliban, the concern that we have is that the group will fragment. The more radical elements will still resist.
And a peace deal doesn't include, say, ISIS, for example.
No, it doesn't. But, there will be a Taliban 2.0 and a Taliban 3.0. And I think the best hope we have is that we have a low temperature insurgency for a decade or two. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, we'll compromise on our values and the things that we've built over the last 20 years, and we'll bring these guys into our system, and yet the fighting will continue. But the world is lost patience. And I think if you look at the US and you look at the elections and so forth, that they want to disengage. I mean, I think that, across the political establishment, I think there's no one that says that we have to actually be engaged in the region. So that's very dangerous. And but it also makes sense for and President Trump has said this, that the rest of the world also needs to step up. And I think that whether it's India or Britain and others need to also step up. This is a global challenge for us, and it needs to be sort of dealt with in a way that we have to understand it's going to impact us for the next 2 or 3 decades at least.
How does the world deal with a state sponsor of terrorism?
Well, I think to your point, if they can target Qasem Soleimani, why can't they target a general that lives in Rawalpindi? The ISI has been, and again in this book, in this chapter, this senior US official confirms that how active they were in terms of their support of the Taliban. Listen, you cannot have a peace deal until the sanctuaries exist in those countries. And what the weapons and training and everything else and the funding they receive from Pakistan, it's contributed to 8,000 deaths, international casualties in Afghanistan. It's not something that you can ignore. But I think that what we're seeing in Doha and the negotiations, it's to an extent, it can be misinterpreted as a defeat. It's a surrender deal in the eyes of many.
And there's no real clarity as to what Pakistan's role will be in terms of this peace deal, what role they will take.
It's wishful thinking, but I think you have to look at history and how Pakistan has played its hand in the past. Whether it was after 9/11, whether it was in the 90s or even the 80s. I think for us to expect something different is a bit naive.
Erin, Saad and the other panelists talked about ideology. I mean, what is so appealing about the ideology of terrorism that draws people to it?
Well, there's definitely a huge body of research behind the push and pull factors that lead people into violent extremist and terrorist groups. I wouldn't want to orientalize it. So actually, when you look at white supremacy terrorism or Islamist extremist terrorism or other forms of violent extremism, that process looks very similar. And oftentimes people focus on the grievances. So feeling disenfranchised, feeling like you're part of a marginalized group. That would include a lot of people, and most people that have experienced those perhaps negative push factors, they're not going to become terrorists. What we do find, and I think the key ingredient that does drive people into these groups is the empowerment structure that it provides. And actually, that's one of the saddest things, is that maybe they're not finding that elsewhere, but that these groups are promising clarity. So they're taking all these confusing, very complex socio-political problems, and they're simplifying it into very easy to digest messaging of who is good and who is bad, why you are being marginalized, and they offer the solution, which is the most important part. They, in fact, offer a hero narrative whereby we've simplified what the problem is, and you are the hero that can help be part of the solution, and it's a very clear pathway. And dare I say, it's very hard to find that sort of simplified messaging in other empowerment structures, especially for young people. But when we look at Daesh, or the so-called Islamic State, we saw recruitment happen from a huge range of socio-political backgrounds, women that had PhDs that went and joined in some cases. We also saw people join from more criminal organizational backgrounds that had previous offenses, but we also saw people with engineering skills or basic accountancy skills. That's an interesting case study because building a state building like they were trying to do, is a very different and wider recruitment strategy than militant, violent, non-state armed group recruitment. So they were going above and beyond militant recruitment and actually looking to state build. When you look at other forms of violent extremism like the white supremacy movements or extreme right-wing violent extremist movements across Europe and the US, similarly, they're offering a lot of comradeship, a lot of friendship and social networks, sometimes job opportunities. So the questions are really, how do you prevent people being allured by a false narrative in the first place? If they start getting involved in it, how do you counter that narrative as far as an online space is concerned? And then once somebody is within that network, how can you disengage them? And these demand multi-sector approaches. That includes the tech sector being at the table.
General Petraeus, who was here last year, talked about the physical caliphate no longer existing, but actually that's now moved to an online caliphate. You work for Facebook, and often there's a finger of blame on tech companies for not doing enough, for being negligent when it comes to cracking down on the radicalization that goes on online. How do you respond to that?
I would say that a lot has been done, especially in the last 5 years. The first thing is that most tech companies, I'm on a policy team that just does counterterrorism and dangerous organizations. That team did not exist 5 years ago. Tech companies did not know that they had to hire in-house expertise on these topics. When you're developing a new piece of wonderful, beautiful technology, there's an idealism behind it, and you never think how horribly that tool could possibly be used. So I think we have, especially with the larger tech companies, we've come a long way. We have over 350 people at Facebook that just work on counterterrorism and dangerous organizations, and that's supported by over 35,000 people on different time zones on safety and operations teams that have different specialties, different language capacities, different cultural nuanced expertise, people coming from law enforcement backgrounds, legal backgrounds, practitioner backgrounds, but also engineering support. So for a tech company, it's really three questions. It's how can you build out that human expertise? Where can you use artificial intelligence and tooling to be more proactive in detecting these networks or violating pieces of content around terrorism? And then how do you build multi-sector partnerships? And so beyond the human expertise, already for artificial intelligence, we've taken tooling from other abuse areas. So we use photo and video matching technology that was learned from the child sexual abuse area of how to match around hashed pieces of technology so that we can detect it upon upload. We also can use things like language detection, better technology around recidivism so that if you take down an account for some of these indicators, the same bad actor is prevented from returning. This takes a lot of engineering support and a lot of testing around false positives to make sure that we're not over-censoring. So it's important that we build in appeals processes. But partnerships-wise, what we've seen is the result is good. You know, in the first 3 quarters of last year, Facebook removed over 18 million pieces of terrorist content. That's a lot.
How much content are we seeing coming out daily from a group like ISIS today?
So if you look at the heyday of ISIS, they were releasing more than 200 unique pieces of propaganda each week. And that was in about 8 to 12 different languages, depending how fluently you look at it. There were spelling errors in some. And if you look at that now, it's a drip feed. It's very, very little. So as far as centralized, organized propaganda from the various, I think, 36 to 38 different branded media wings that they had at one point, we've gone down to a very tiny amount. However, the adversarial shift, when we talk about a virtual caliphate, is now the movement to smaller, less regulated platforms. So we aren't going to see the obvious stuff as much on Facebook. We're having to see where trails lead to, and we have to work across the tech sector. So it's part of the reason that in 2017, we formed the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, GIFCT, and that was founded by Facebook, YouTube, Microsoft, and Twitter, and now includes a wide range of companies like Amazon, Dropbox, LinkedIn, Pinterest, ones that you wouldn't even normally think to come to the table, but we're all seeing the shift across platforms.
I'm going to open the floor to the audience, and I believe the young fellows have some questions. So if you can come to the microphone and ask your questions. They're all looking at each other. Samir tells me you have loads of questions, so I'll give you a chance to think about it, but I'll come to you here. Please, if you could introduce yourself, and then...
I'm Bipin Rawat. I'm a researcher and a journalist. I work on terrorism and radicalization in India. I have a question for the first CDS of India. Congratulations, sir. And my question is, sir, radicalization cannot be eliminated because I've seen that it has been a failed case. I have not seen a single successful case where we saw that de-radicalization got successful. So what are your views on de-radicalization and radicalization? And if de-radicalization is not successful, so how come we eliminate terrorism in the country? Thank you.
I don't think we should work it at that way. Anything that has started can be put to an end. To say that radicalization cannot be countered, I don't quite agree with this. Radicalization can be countered. You got to start looking at where the radicalization is happening. And the radicalization, who are the people who are radicalizing these people? It is happening from schools, universities, from religious places and sites. And then there are a group of people who are spreading this. So I think first what you get to think is, you get to the nerve of the whole thing as to who's radicalizing people. You can start isolating these people gradually and then start a counter-radicalization program by identifying people who have been radicalized to what degree. You got to segregate them in degrees. And then look at those who are completely radicalized, first target them, but then start also looking at the future. Like what we are seeing in Kashmir, we saw radicalization happening. Today we are seeing radicalization being undertaken even amongst the young people. Girls and boys as young as 10 and 12 are now being radicalized. These people can still be isolated from these radicalization in a gradual way. But there are people who have completely been radicalized. These people need to be taken out separately, possibly taken into some de-radicalization camps. We've got de-radicalization camps going on in our country. Let me tell you, even Pakistan is doing the same. Pakistan also has de-radicalization camps, which they have understood that some of the terrorism that they have been sponsoring is actually hitting back at them. So they are also doing it. So to say that there is no end state to this, I don't quite agree. You have to, of course, it will be a long haul. As I said, when you look at warfare, warfare ends in a particular time frame. You know, as I said, when the dessert gets served, it comes in a time-bound manner. But terrorism is not going to come in that manner. It is here to stay. It will continue unless you address all these issues. Ideology, radicalization is one issue which has to be addressed on priority, and it can be.
Do you think the Indian Army's approach in Kashmir has been so heavy-handed that it's led many to become radicalized?
I think that the impression being created that the Indian Army has been heavy-handed. Indian Army had to be heavy-handed in the very initial stages when the proxy war was launched on us in the early 90s. That time we had to use to some hard measures, but thereafter, let me tell you, Indian Army has not been using hard tactics, because if you look at the casualty figures that our security forces suffer vis-a-vis the terrorists, the ratio is almost 1:3. If we were heavy-handed, we wouldn't be suffering casualties, because any time we suspected a place being infested with terrorists, we would just go and blow that place away. Our thing is, we first take the shot onto ourselves, identify a location where the terrorist is, and only then start acting. So I think there's a lot of misinformation that is being spread that
But
we are
things like
high-handed.
pellet guns are used, you know, and a lot of young people are being blinded who are just protesting. They're not radicalized.
There were people who were young people who had been radicalized who were pelting stones, which was as lethal as pellet guns. We have had casualties, including death being caused because of stones. If we start saying that the services also, or the security forces also start using stones against the stone-pelters, that is not the way the security forces are meant to act. Pellet guns is supposed to be a non-lethal weapon system, but it is supposed to be fired below the legs. But you please see how a terrorist operates. You know, you look at these stone-pelters. I will show you positions. They are picking up stones from the ground. There are some people who are throwing stones standing, some people picking up stones on the ground. So when the soldiers are firing at the legs, there are some people whose face is touching the ground. He's picking up a stone. So the pellet gun goes and hits the face. He's not aiming for the face, he's aiming for the leg where the pellet gun is supposed to be aimed. But if at that stage you are picking up a stone on the ground and your face is at the leg height, obviously your face will get hit. So I don't think the security forces can be blamed for the injuries that have been caused by pellet guns. Pellet guns are non-lethal weapon systems, but now we've devised different ways of dealing with this, and pellet guns are very sparingly being used. In fact, I would say rarely being used in the valley.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Hakim. Two short questions, one to General Rawat and one to Mr. Bailey. General Rawat, congratulations on your appointment. My principal question is about how the model of your appointment as a first among equals system is going to work, because in the army, even I'm a grandson of a Gorkha officer. Does the 2IC culture also infiltrate there, or how will this first among equals thing work? Even in the Supreme Court, we see the CJI has some of a, administrative upper hand in the working of the court. How is it going to work in the Chiefs of Staff Committee. And my second question is to Mr. Bailey. We've seen a phenomenon of strong leaders all over the world being elected. In India, of course, Prime Minister Modi. Now in the United Kingdom, we have Prime Minister Johnson. What do you think Prime Minister Johnson means for our country, and what do you think he means for counter-terrorism efforts all around the world, and specifically for India with respect to Pakistan and the neighborhood? Thank you so much.
Well, as far as the charter of the CDS has been laid out, CDS is the first among the equals, but he's got clear and well-defined responsibilities which have been spelt out, and that while he's first among the equals, he has some authority over the 3 service chiefs other than on operational issues. So I think the task is well cut out, and I think we will be able to function within the firm framework which has been laid out for the CDS. I don't visualize any problems. We've had meetings with the 3 chiefs, and I think we are doing well. We've already started functioning. A lot of decisions have already been taken in the past 15 days.
Gareth, I think there was a question to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for, I think, the implied compliment towards Prime Minister Johnson, who was returned with a strong majority and has a very well-known, I think, commitment to cherish and value a partnership with India and to take the UK-India relationship to a new level, to make a step change in how we work together. I should say that's a step change from an extremely high base. The depth, the breadth, the strength of the relationship is absolutely extraordinary, world-class. In my own position back in the Foreign Office, I sometimes struggle to wonder how to improve upon it. But there we are. That's a nice place to be in. In terms of counterterrorism, I think the not often talked about fact is that year on year, we have a really deep cooperative dialogue with the government of India on the full spectrum of counterterrorism issues. That's 13 years now to my count. I chaired with my colleagues in London this year's dialogue, and you can of course ask the Ministry of External Affairs, but there was a real sense, I think, from their takeaway that we were embarking on something even better going ahead. The British are absolutely no stranger to terror attacks on our soil. Over the last 2 years alone, we've foiled 19 major terrorist plots. Of course, you've seen one very vividly, the latest London Bridge attack, but do recall that behind that there are 19 that were prevented. So we're sharp and we're ready, and we have a lot of experience that we can share with India, and we know, of course, that India has just as much experience, if not more, to share with us. I think, I haven't had a chance to speak about the Financial Action Task Force, which of course is very much in the news, and the General mentioned it, as did others. The Financial Action Task Force is an impartial, objective, technical body that absolutely scrutinizes and pores over the evidence that is put to it. And the UK actually are the penholder within the task force on Pakistan. We are the ones that have to sift and work through the evidence put to the task force. We are the ones that have to apply quite an extraordinary amount of Her Majesty's Treasury brainpower to work out what we've got there by way of a record from Pakistan. And so far, there is definitely some progress that has been made. Some progress. There is so much more progress that needs to be done. And we say to Pakistan, at the very highest level, and they agree with us, that a step change is required. And Prime Minister Khan and Chief of Army Staff Bajwa have made very clear commitments, and those commitments can be seen. We can all look at them on public record, and we can decide whether or not Pakistan has met those commitments. And as we approach the next stage of the Financial Task Force, we know, of course, that all options are on the table on the evidence, on the basis of evidence submitted to the FATF. It's there for a reason. It's a sober body. It has a mission to do. And although it's a long, long road to travel, we're confident that it is doing its job.
But Gareth, you said that Pakistan's taken concrete steps. We can find that. But could you give us an example?
So, very basically, because the technical language runs to pages and pages, some progress on legislation around counterterrorism financing, particularly on remittances, which can finance terrorism, and particular progress around detentions and arrests. Again, I stress this is some progress. Nobody is sitting out there and saying that's a complete record, by no means. But what is important is that the Pakistanis too recognize that there is a way to go, and they have to keep moving in a sustainable, significant, and non-reversible direction.
Sorry, I'll take a question there and from the fellows, and then I'll come back here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The name is Maximilian Brembring from Germany. Thank you for the panel for this very interesting discussion. You've stressed also, just now that we were talking about the FATF, the importance of cutting down on financing of terrorism. And one discussion that we've had throughout the last year was on the role that cryptocurrencies play. So far, traditional cryptocurrencies have only been used limitedly by terrorist groups because of their volatility. Now we are discussing something like stable coins, and many governments have expressed their worries about the role that that could play. My question to Aaron is, what is your take on that, especially with the view to Facebook's Libra initiative?
I'll just take the two more questions there, and I'll come back to you, Aaron.
Thank you. My name is Beth Goldberg, and I'm from the United States. My question regards the complicated relationship between tech companies and governments. We know that there's been tentative collaboration, particularly in the aftermath of terrorist attacks like Christchurch in New Zealand. But we talked on the panel about getting to the roots of terrorism, which is preventing radicalization in the first place. So I want to ask the panelists, particularly Aaron, what we think tech companies and governments can do or should do to better address prevention of violent extremism. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Luce and I'm from Belgium, and I also had a question for Aaron. You mentioned that you work closely together with companies like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter to regulate or to tackle extremism online, and I was wondering for the unregulated platforms like Telegram, Signal, are there any ways that we can tackle radicalization there, or is this absolutely impossible? Thank you.
Aaron, did you get all of those?
Yeah,
I there's one notes. On cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. Great questions. So on the cryptocurrency front, you're correct that we haven't seen a huge proliferation of the usage of cryptocurrencies among traditional terrorist networks to date, but we have seen some indicators around early ISIS mentions of Bitcoin and some interesting topics like that. It was definitely meant to be safety by design when Facebook did decide to take part as one of the partners that developed Libra. Libra was actually launched by about 30 different entities, including banking sectors at the table. So it was built with the banking sector in mind. It definitely wasn't a rogue warrior move by Facebook, and it took many, many months. And what Facebook developed specifically was Calibra. I agree it's confusing, and maybe they should have chosen a different name, but Calibra is the wallet that holds Libra as a currency to be used on Facebook. I think what we need to do is have a lot of oversight and partnerships. I'm glad that the currency was launched with banking sector in mind and security oversights that go along with that. But I think we also need to keep our intelligence and open source intelligence with an ear to the ground to make sure that we're seeing if that does proliferate in any way, shape, or form. We work with a lot of experts and researchers that all they do is sit on different parts of the web and look for what those trends are going to be. It's hard to sometimes know what an adversarial shift is going to look like, but definitely there's no way we want to be part of terrorist finance through any of our products and systems. We work a lot with sanctions teams, and there's always a lot of lawyers in the room when these discussions happen as well. Happy to follow up with you afterwards for a little bit more of a deep dive. On the talk about how technology is working with governments, you mentioned work within a crisis, and I think that is an important one. It's important that we are at the table when a real-world harm-based event is ongoing or has just happened. So in the aftermath of Christchurch in New Zealand, we had policy teams go to New Zealand to work with them on the ground with some of our law enforcement teams. Those efforts scale up very quickly. So in the first 24 hours after Christchurch, we removed 1.5 million versions of the video being shared. I look at terrorist propaganda all the time. I have never seen one piece of propaganda go so viral so quickly, and that was not an Islamist extremist piece of propaganda. We developed with the GIFCT, so that multi-platform effort, we developed a content incident protocol that now can stand alongside different governments' crisis protocol. So if there's an online aspect that happens alongside an attack, we can work very quickly to label it, hash it, and share the hashes among the GIFCT consortium of companies. A hash means it's not the actual photo or video, it's like a digital fingerprint of that entity that can't be reversed, so that if you have it on your platform, it's like putting a fishing net through so that you can find it. I think when you talk about prevention, though, that's a very different topic. And really, that's not just about tech and government working together. If you look at preventative counter-speech content, you need a credible voice. And oftentimes, a tech company or a government might not be the credible voice to engage with people about countering an extremist ideology. So it really takes civil society partnerships. The GIFCT actually held a workshop in Delhi last November, and it was amazing because we were able to bring academics to the table with tech companies, government law enforcement, and civil society groups. And I guarantee you, not everyone always agrees on the approach in that room, but having a multi-sector declassified threat assessment that also outlines different approaches for prevention, the narrative has to be very localized, it has to be very credible, and a lot of times it has to be peer-to-peer. So I know in India, Facebook's helped support initiatives like Voice Positive or the Digital Masala Challenge. We've had the peer-to-peer network, and all of these are really to help upscale and optimize civil society voices strategically. It's really a strategic communications challenge to get to the right audiences online to help cause resiliency and really preventative voices to cause that buffer where people thereby don't join a process of radicalization in the first place and have the materials and the narratives necessary to provide the right alternatives.
I'll take a few questions just so, because we're short on time. Yeah.
My name is Sanjeev Tripathi. I'm a retired civil servant from India with the intelligence background. My question relates to countering radical Islamic terrorism. We all know that the military defeat of ISIS or killing of Baghdadi has been a big setback to the ISIS, but the war against jihadi extremism has not yet won. It cannot be, actually, we all now agree, won by military action alone, and the ideology has to be countered. Now, one thing I will just say here, that it's a religion-based ideology. So primarily, it has to be countered within the religion. Any interference from outside could be counterproductive. So now my question is, the thing is that if it has to be countered within the religion, that means initiative has to come from Islamic countries to define what Islam stands for. Moderate Islamic theologians have to be encouraged to counter this jihadi propaganda, because jihadis, they quote extensively from religious books, verses from Holy Quran. So it has to be countered by Islamic theologians themselves. So my question is that whether anything is being done in the West to encourage moderate Islamists, moderate theologians to counter the ideology that is being propagated by the radical Islamic elements.
Thank you, thank you. And I'll take a question there, and one, sorry, just behind you, sir, and then I'll come back.
Morning.
Yep.
Good
Go
morning,
ahead.
this is Yash from University of Delhi. My question is, how do you think the withdrawal of US from Afghanistan would change the security system in India and the world as a whole?
Thank you. One here, and then I'll come back to
My
you.
name is Dr. Sharma. Terrorism is a global phenomenon, and it happens because it is funded. Is there any global mechanism by which you can identify who funds terrorism? If not, then why not to create a global system for surveillance to identify who funds terrorism and to counter it? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to?
Sure. I can kick it off. One, just about the idea of, what angle should a narrative take to actually be constructive in countering an extremist ideology. One aspect definitely is the ideology itself, whether that's religious or politically motivated. There are tons of examples globally around amazing interfaith communities or religious communities that are proactively developing counter-speech and proactively engaging online. I know we work with a group called Imams Online, and it's literally just about having them present their interpretations and debunking some of the different verses that are sometimes abused in promoting violence. So if anyone wants examples, I have lists and lists of amazing NGOs producing a lot of these incredible pieces of content online. I think we shouldn't discount, however, that when you pick apart at somebody that has been radicalized, sometimes the ideology itself is the loosest angle. Sometimes actually a lot of the reasons why they got involved was because of comradeship, a sense of family, an empowerment structure, and a peer-to-peer network. And so there's a huge diversity of voices that can be very effective and credible. And I would also look to former extremists as a very credible voice. And there's some great global networks such as the Against Violent Extremism Network, some of the exit programs, to back to an original question around disengagement. There's some amazing disengagement or de-radicalization programs, if you want to call it that, that have former extremists as the credible practitioners that help people leave because they've been there and back. And so I think some of these exit programs are worth highlighting and surfacing online in a more robust way. I know that the redirect method that Jigsaw helped develop that's being used across Google, Microsoft, and parts of Facebook help when people are searching for this sort of content that they actually are directed to NGOs and content that are countering it. So I think we've seen some innovation. And around global mechanisms, I know from the tech sector, the whole point of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism was to go beyond a one platform, one country approach. So really, I mean, please raise your hand if you have one app on your phone. Okay, bad actors are the same. So we need multiple platforms from multiple countries, and the analysis has to be transnational, multi-platform. And so that's the entire point, is to strategically look beyond one country, one platform, and then we can actually get to the adversarial shift. And there will always be platforms that don't want to come to the table. So some of the telegrams and signals, the door is open to them. Maybe they just haven't been targeted enough to come to the table. But our point from tech companies is to have an open door to help smaller, medium, and large companies get to a better place, whether that's by tech solutions, declassified threat assessments with law enforcement from government, which we build into our workshops, or just better, quick turnaround academic research. So I know that ORF was part of the global research on terrorism and technology that GIFCT funded last year. And it meant that we were getting quick insights and reports from 7 different institutes on 4 continents that produced 13 papers last year. And they were all meant to help the tech companies.
Saad, I'm going to ask you the question about the US withdrawal. You're speaking to all the different players. Is there a sense of, how it'll help the region, how it'll help India?
Well, I think that, to an extent, America's involvement has made everyone else very lazy. And I think that this gives the region an opportunity to actually do things on their own, whether it's, helping the Afghans or dealing with terrorism, regional issues and grievances. And I think people get radicalized for different reasons in different parts of the world. So I think there's an opportunity as well, and I think that we have to take ownership of regional issues in South Central Asia. And I think everyone has to do their bit. But, when some of the state actors are not willing to play ball, it makes it much more difficult. That's why you need that international consensus in terms of dealing with some of these people in a very serious manner. I just want to get back to Facebook because I know you're trying your best, but just for us to assume that everything's okay because Facebook's dealing with it is absolute rubbish. On a daily basis, I receive videos on Facebook, on WhatsApp, various other platforms, Taliban videos, Al-Qaeda videos from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria, every single day. They're able to amplify their messages. Whatever Facebook and the other platforms are doing are not enough. They have to take responsibility. I run a media organization in half a dozen countries. If we put anything out, we would lose our license. We would be banished. And I don't see Facebook, Twitter, Google, and others facing the consequences of their actions or lack of actions. So whatever they're doing, it's not enough. And, yes, you may take down 18 million videos, but you may also allow 18 million videos to get through, or even 5 videos. That's enough to radicalize people. That's enough to amplify their messages. And even getting back to Islam, unfortunately, there is today the internet allows anyone to become an imam. And the most radical voices tend to resonate, unfortunately. Again, it's in this new environment of social media, it's very difficult for states, for people like us, media organizations, to monitor and to control what goes on.
Gareth.
What Saad and Erin say is extremely compelling from the perspective of someone who's a diplomat, and of course, Saad's media, and Erin is a representative of a tech company. Ultimately, Erin said it best, I think. Authentic voices are needed. They need to be local voices. They need to be peer-to-peer voices. And if you get the source fixed, then the work of the diplomat and the work of the tech company, the work of the media organization becomes that much easier to do. That does not mean that we're letting ourselves off the hook. We have something we have to do. We have to do it in a full spectrum way all together at once. To the Afghanistan point, and to Saad's understandable pessimism earlier, let's just recall here that for 18, 19 years, the international community has been working on something called an Afghanistan peace process. We are now in something at a stage which is innovative, difficult, hard, but ultimately to the point of the local voice and ownership and support and culture shift. This has got to be, and yes, it sounds like a cliche, but it's a real thing, an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process.
Is it? Is the current process Afghan-led and Afghan-owned?
It has to be. It will be. We are at a stage, and that stage has to be overpassed, and we need to get in at pace very quickly into intra-Afghan negotiations. We have been waiting goodness knows how long to get to that point, and if we don't get into the intra-Afghan negotiation space with something genuinely authentic, owned across the political spectrum, then yes, we will fail. But we are moving in that direction.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we've got time for one last question. So,
okay, I'm Ijaz Malikzada. I'm from Afghanistan. I'm a delegate here from the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies. I work as a researcher. Aaron, I echo Saad here that there isn't much done in terms of videos. I was monitoring Taliban accounts, like hundreds of accounts during the election season, September 28th elections in Afghanistan. They were posting videos, tons of videos. It seemed that most of these accounts were managed from one room, maybe from Rawalpindi or wherever it is, but maybe someone or a group of people behind these accounts. They were fake accounts, most of them. There was no signs of life, but there was no action. For the record, I reported some of these Twitter and Facebook posts, but the message came back that the posts did not violate the community guidelines. And so it continues. Those same accounts still exist, but they post. Is there any specific, anti-Taliban program in Facebook, just to be frank? And on the intra...
Sorry, Ijaz, we've literally run out of time, so I'm just going to take that question to Erin and let you address it.
Okay,
sure, and come find me in the break. I'm happy to continue the dialogue, absolutely. So I'm definitely not here to say all of counterterrorism, it's your problem, we fixed it, box ticked, no more terrorists on Facebook. It's absolutely just not the case, because as we said, we'll change a policy, we'll change a piece of technology, and the adversarial shift is very quick. What I would say is that flagging is necessary. I definitely am not psychic, unfortunately, working on that app, I'm sure, but I would be happy to re-review any of the accounts that you flagged. We do need people to flag things, because if you're seeing a video, it means it wasn't hashed. It means we don't have it in our file to be able to detect it. Usually one flag of a video can lead to the removal of 100, 1,000, 10,000 other shares of that video. And then we would also review the profiles. So you're obviously finding a gap where you were flagging some things that we didn't catch, and we should definitely be re-reviewing it.
The process feels very reactive, like something's out there and then you respond to it.
Well, there's not an algorithm. First of all, there's not an agreed upon global definition of terrorism. So there's definitely not an algorithm that says this is terrorism. We can do things proactively around logo detection, around recidivism, around network analysis. Once we know about a piece of content and it's been labeled, then we can remove it en masse. So 98 to 99% of what we do remove for terrorism is done proactively without anyone flagging it to us in the first place. But that 1% of what we're missing at scale with billions of global users is absolutely crucial for those indicators. Some of it can be done proactively. A lot of it does have to be reactively because we don't know what the content looks like. The adversarial shift is real. And we see even official terrorist content being used in clips by mainstream media, by very credible voices, shared among researchers. So context matters. It's not like child exploitation imagery where that is illegal to share at all costs. During the rise of ISIS, we saw covers of Dabik magazines being used by BBC and elsewhere. And so context, we don't want to remove the mainstream dialogue around terrorism. We have to be very effective of scaled both what can a machine find, but also triaging that to human review. And it's hard.
Okay, I can see Samir hovering, trying to push us off the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank my panelists.
Thank you, Yalda, and thank you to all the speakers this morning for this very engaging conversation. But, let me just add something and misuse my role as a curator here. I think, why are we picking up on Facebook for allowing Taliban to continue to do their stuff, and countries are encouraging Taliban to do all what they want to do? So I think it's not a Facebook issue, it's a much wider issue. I think all of us are normalizing Taliban. It's not just the Facebook policies. So think about it.